I never saw it coming, how could I? There I was, sitting at the dinner table, savoring a quiet moment after a long, exhausting day. My wife, Lisa, 42 years old and someone I thought I knew inside out, looks me straight in the eye and, out of nowhere, tells me she's going out to dinner with a colleague. Yeah, I know what you're probably thinking. Dinner with a coworker doesn't sound all that suspicious. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just a friendly meal. No, this was a full-on date, a real deal, no mistakes about it kind of date with some guy from her office. And the way she said it? Like it was just another Tuesday. Let me back up for a second. Lisa and I got married young, she was 22 at the time. We were clueless, barely out of the gate, and she was pregnant. Looking back, I'm amazed we even thought we could pull it off. But like plenty of young couples, we jumped in with both feet, figuring we'd learn as we went. And sure, there were good years, especially in the beginning. I had a knack for numbers and managed to turn that into a thriving business. Before long, we were living comfortably, more than comfortably, really. I gave Lisa and her family a life most people would envy. But money can't fix everything. We had a son, our pride and joy. But he was born sick, so sick. There's nothing worse than watching your child suffer, knowing no amount of money or expert care can make it better. The helplessness of it, the sheer weight of it, stays with you forever. He fought so hard, but after years of battling, he passed away. And Lisa? She changed. She retreated into herself, shutting me out completely. I tried everything: therapy, vacations, taking time off work, anything to bring her back. But it didn't work. For years, it was like living with a ghost. She was there, physically, but not really there. When she finally opened up a bit, thanks to some skilled psychologists, things got better, but only a little. She was different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd never be the same. Fast forward to that night. Lisa casually drops this bomb about going to dinner with some guy from work. She called him just a friend. Someone who'd been supportive, someone she needed to talk to. But I'm not an idiot. This wasn't just about conversation. She seemed lighter, more alive. And she credited him for that. I didn't know what to say. My brain short-circuited. How do you even respond to something like that? Instead of yelling or starting a fight, I just stood up and walked out. No phone, no keys, nothing. Just me and my two legs. I needed air. Lisa chased after me, her voice trembling with desperation. Wait, she said, her footsteps right behind mine. It's not like that. Please, just listen. But I didn't want to hear it. What could she possibly say to make this okay? That it wasn't a betrayal? That it was perfectly normal? She begged me to believe her, insisted it wasn't cheating. He's just a friend, she said, like that made it better. Then came the kicker. He's helped me feel alive again. You don't understand how much I've needed this. Needed what? A dinner? A man who wasn't me? I was too angry to argue, but one thing was clear: if I told her not to go, she'd go anyway. Lisa's always been that way. She goes after what she wants, no matter the cost. Problem is, she never seems to consider how steep the price might be. I knew I couldn't just let this slide. Not this time. I've put up with a lot over the years, but this was crossing a line. I needed answers, proof of what was really going on. So, I reached out to a buddy of mine who has connections. He set me up with a private investigator, someone who could get the full story. I wanted everything: the guy's name, his background, his intentions. I wanted to know where they went, what they talked about, and what they did. And yeah, I wanted pictures. I needed to see them together, to know exactly what was happening behind my back. Deep down, I already knew this was more than just a casual dinner. Something didn't sit right, and I wasn't about to watch my life unravel without a fight. So, that's where I left it. The investigator was on the case, and I was waiting to see the truth laid out in front of me. I was stuck waiting to figure out who this guy was, what my wife, Lisa, was really up to, and how I was supposed to deal with it all. And yeah, I know what you're thinking: why didn't I just confront her right away? Believe me, the thought crossed my mind. But I've learned over the years that sometimes, patience is your best weapon. Let the truth come to you, and when it does, you make your move. So I waited. And that, my friends, is where everything really began. The detective I hired wasted no time. Just a few days after I gave him the go-ahead, he came back with some intel. The guy my wife was so chummy with? His name was Dave. Yeah, Dave. Of course, it's always a guy with a name as unremarkable as that. But don't let the boring name fool you. Dave wasn't just some random nobody. He had a family of his own, a wife, 2 kids, the whole suburban package. They lived in one of those oversized houses with a perfectly manicured lawn, probably a golden retriever in the backyard. The picture-perfect life, right? But we all know appearances can be deceiving. People like Dave are often hiding something, and I was determined to uncover whatever that was. The detective didn't just give me the basics either. He went deep. I had everything: Dave's address, where his kids went to school, what his wife did for a living, even what kind of car he drove. It was all laid out for me like a spy file on the man who was apparently making my wife feel alive again. I stared at his picture for a long time. He looked normal. Just an average, middle-aged guy who probably cared more about weekend football than sneaking around with another man's wife. But looks can be deceiving, and I wasn't about to trust anything at face value. Lisa wasn't giving me the whole story. I knew that much, and I wasn't going to sit around hoping she'd suddenly decide to come clean. I started planning. When you've got money like I do, you can make things happen. Big things. And I didn't care what it cost. This wasn't about the money. It was about my pride, my sanity, and getting to the truth. And yeah, maybe a little bit about revenge too. My next move required a certain kind of person, and I knew exactly who to call. I reached out to an old friend of mine. Let's call him Mike. He's the kind of guy who knows people, if you catch my drift. Mike owed me a few favors, and when I told him what was going on, he didn't even hesitate. Within hours, he had someone lined up for me. Her name? Doesn't matter. Let's just say she was young, late 20s at most, blonde, with legs that could stop traffic and a face that could make a guy forget his own name. The kind of woman who could make a family man like Dave lose all common sense. When Mike showed me her picture, I didn't even have to think twice. She was perfect for the job. And before you jump to conclusions, I'm not going to spell out exactly what this girl does for a living. Let's just say she's a professional and leave it at that. You get the idea? With her on board, the plan was shaping up nicely. But I wasn't stopping there. I had another guy tailing Dave, keeping tabs on his every move. This wasn't just about Lisa anymore. I needed to know what Dave was doing when he wasn't with her, how he spent his time, who else he might be seeing. I wasn't settling for some half-baked story. I wanted the whole picture. The private investigator was still digging for dirt, and my decoy was ready to make her move. Everything was falling into place. Dave would slip up, guys like him always do, and when he did, I'd have all the proof I needed. But then, just when I thought I had it all figured out, the whole plan nearly fell apart. The day before Lisa's supposed dinner with Dave, she hit me with something I didn't expect. We were sitting in the kitchen, me playing it cool, acting like I wasn't orchestrating her downfall behind the scenes. She looked up from her phone, completely casual, and said, "I've been thinking. I'm not going to meet Dave tomorrow after all." For a moment, I didn't even register what she'd said. She wasn't going? After all the effort I'd put into this, after everything was perfectly set up to catch her and Dave red-handed? What the hell was going on? I forced myself to stay calm. "Oh?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Why not?" She hesitated, glancing down at her phone. "I just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate anymore." Then she added, "I'm meeting a friend instead. We're going to grab dinner at that new place downtown." I stared at her, my mind spinning. Something about this didn't sit right. Sure, maybe she'd had a change of heart, maybe she realized how messed up this whole situation was. But the way she said it? It didn't feel right. Not at all. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than Lisa was letting on. When she said she was meeting a friend, my gut told me to question everything. Was it still Dave? Or was there another guy in the mix now? I knew better than to press her for details, though. If I pushed too hard, she'd get suspicious, and that was the last thing I needed. So, I nodded and acted like I was fine with it. But deep down, I wasn't letting her off the hook that easily. The plan was still in motion. I wasn't about to call off the private investigator or the girl we brought into the equation just because Lisa had a sudden change of heart. Whatever she was up to, whether it was with Dave or someone else, I was going to find out. She could try to rewrite the narrative all she wanted, but by this point, I had too much invested in getting the truth. So, I played it cool. Let her think everything was normal. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I made sure every detail of the plan was moving forward. I knew it was only a matter of time before Lisa slipped up. And when she did, I'd be ready. Turns out, my instincts were dead on. Lisa didn't cancel her date with Dave, no matter what story she told me in the kitchen. The private investigator confirmed it a few days later. She had made a reservation for 2 at a fancy restaurant, the kind of place we used to go to back when things were good between us. But that wasn't the worst of it. She'd also booked a hotel room. And not just any room, this was a $400 a night suite. You don't rent a room like that to talk. I didn't need a crystal ball to figure out what was going on. Dinner, drinks, and then a night at the hotel. It was all so clear, and just thinking about it made my blood boil. But I couldn't afford to lose my cool. Not yet. This was a time for strategy, not emotion. First, I assigned one of the investigators to keep an eye on Dave's house. I needed to know if his wife was home while he was off gallivanting with mine. Timing was everything. The goal wasn't just to catch Lisa and Dave in the act. I wanted to make sure Dave's picture-perfect life came crashing down too. And then came the waiting. That's the hardest part. Knowing what's happening, knowing what's about to unfold, and sitting there with nothing to do but wait for the right moment to strike. When the first photos came in, it felt like a punch to the gut. There was Lisa, sitting at the table with Dave, looking cozy, like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. But what really set me off was the next photo. They were kissing, right there in the middle of the restaurant, out in the open, like they had nothing to hide. Like this was perfectly normal. I wanted to lose it. Smash something. Scream. But I knew better. This was just the beginning. I had to keep my head in the game. The hotel room was waiting, and I was sure they'd be heading there next. But before that could happen, I had another move to make. I called the investigator stationed outside Dave's house. "Is his wife home?" I asked. "Yes, she's home," he confirmed. "Perfect," I said. I sent him the photo of Lisa and Dave kissing, along with some very specific instructions. I could already imagine how this would play out, and the thought of it gave me a rush of satisfaction. The detective went to Dave's house and knocked on the door. I can only imagine what his wife must have been thinking when she answered. Probably assumed it was something routine. But she couldn't have been more wrong. The investigator didn't waste any time. He asked her, "Do you know where your husband is right now?" She probably stammered something about him working late. That's the kind of excuse guys like Dave always use. But the investigator didn't miss a beat. "No, he's not working late," he told her. "I think you'll want to see this." He handed her the photo, the one of Dave kissing Lisa. I can only imagine the look on her face. Shock, confusion, maybe even denial. Her whole world probably started falling apart right there on the doorstep. She stammered something about how Dave had said he'd be home late, but the investigator cut her off. "Your husband's not working. He's on a date." And just like I'd predicted, the fallout began. As soon as the investigator left, I knew she'd be calling Dave, probably screaming into the phone, demanding answers. I pictured Dave's reaction perfectly, his heart sinking when he saw her name pop up, scrambling to come up with an excuse that wouldn't make things worse. But it wouldn't work. She'd be in full meltdown mode, and there'd be no calming her down. And just like that, Dave would have to drop everything and rush home, desperate to put out the fire before it burned his whole life to the ground. While chaos was unraveling in Dave's world, I was sitting at home, waiting for Lisa to come back. In my hand was the picture of her kissing him, the final nail in the coffin of whatever feelings I had left for her. That photo was seared into my memory, and with it, every ounce of love or respect I'd managed to hold onto for Lisa was gone. But this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. I still had cards to play, and the next phase of my plan was already in motion. Lisa thought she was clever, thought she could do this without facing any consequences. What she didn't realize was that I'm not the kind of man you cross lightly. I've spent years building a business, making connections, and learning how to take control of situations, no matter how messy. To me, this was just another problem to solve, another deal to close. And when I was done, both Lisa and Dave were going to regret every single decision that led them to that dinner table. The moment of reckoning was finally here. I'd played the long game, stayed patient, and now it was time to pull the trigger. Remember the blonde I mentioned earlier? The one with the killer looks, the perfect hair, and the kind of presence that could stop a man in his tracks? If it wasn't already obvious, let me spell it out. She wasn't just some random woman. She was a crucial part of my plan. You can probably guess what her profession is, but I'll leave the details vague for reasons that should be clear. What matters is that she was exactly what I needed to set this final piece in motion. When Lisa left for her date, the blonde was already at my house. She looked even better in person, wearing a sleek, form-fitting dress that left little to the imagination. We sat down in the living room, sharing a few glasses of wine. Honestly, I needed the wine more than she did. I wasn't nervous, exactly, more like buzzing with anticipation. What I was about to do wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. It's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife, even if it's for revenge. And really, could it even be called cheating at this point? Lisa had already blown up our marriage with Dave. To me, this wasn't betrayal, it was payback. After a few more drinks, we headed upstairs. Let me make one thing clear. There was nothing romantic about what happened next. No passion, no love, not even lust, really. It was a cold, calculated act. The blonde was good at her job, but my mind was elsewhere the entire time. I wasn't thinking about her, or even really about Lisa at that moment. I was just going through the motions, checking a box in the plan I'd meticulously laid out. We were mid-act when I heard it, the front door creaking open. Lisa was home, right on schedule. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I didn't stop. I wanted her to walk in. I wanted her to see it all. When she finally stepped into the bedroom and saw us, her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. She screamed, a raw, piercing sound, like she'd walked into the middle of some horrific scene. And maybe in her mind she had. She froze in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide, completely stunned by what she was seeing. It was like her entire world was crumbling in front of her, and she didn't know how to process it. The blonde didn't stick around. She got dressed in record time, moving with the kind of efficiency that made me think she'd been in this exact situation before. Without a word, she slipped out of the room and out the front door, leaving Lisa and me alone to deal with the fallout. And then Lisa snapped. I've seen her angry before, but this was something else entirely. She lost all control, screaming at me, calling me a traitor, accusing me of being the reason our marriage was falling apart. I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, hollow laugh. The sheer audacity of her accusations was almost comical. Here she was, furious at me, as if she hadn't just been out with Dave, booking hotel rooms and playing the role of the perfect mistress. I let her rant. She paced back and forth, throwing her arms around, cursing me, calling me every name in the book. And I just stood there, calm, watching her unravel, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally stopped screaming long enough to catch her breath, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo. The one of her and Dave, mid-kiss, right there in the restaurant. The one she probably thought no one would ever see. I held it up to her face, my voice calm and deliberate. I know about the hotel, I said. The one you rented for tonight. The one you thought you'd be spending the night in, with him. Her expression shifted instantly. The anger and self-righteous fury drained from her face, replaced by shock, and maybe even a little fear. She stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. You're staying there tonight, I told her, my voice as cold as ice. That room isn't going to waste. For a moment, she just stood there, silent. I could see the wheels spinning in her head as she tried to figure out a way to turn this around, to make herself the victim. But this time, there was no escape. She was caught, and she knew it. Still, she made one last attempt to shift the blame. "How could you do this?" she screamed, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "After everything we've been through, you're the one cheating now? How can you even live with yourself?" I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm the one to blame here?" I said, incredulous. "You went out with another man. You rented a hotel room to sleep with him. Don't stand there and act like you're innocent." She tried to argue, to twist things around and make it seem like what I'd done was somehow worse than her affair with Dave. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I stood firm, my voice steady, and told her the truth. I reminded her that it was her choices, her emotional distance, her lies, her betrayal, that had brought us to this moment. Eventually, she gave up. She grabbed her purse, fumbling with her phone, and called for a taxi. I didn't stop her. I didn't say another word. I just stood there, watching her pack a bag, knowing full well where she was headed, to that hotel room she'd rented for Dave. Only now, she'd be spending the night there alone. When the door slammed shut behind her, I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. I felt nothing. Just a cold, empty void where our marriage had once been. The revenge might have been satisfying in theory, but it didn't fill the hole she'd left behind. It didn't fix anything. All it did was mark the inevitable end of a relationship that had already fallen apart. But this wasn't the end of the story, not yet. The next phase of my plan was already in motion. And when it was over, Lisa wouldn't just be humiliated, she'd be destroyed. Filing for divorce was the final nail in the coffin. After everything, the lies, the infidelity, the betrayal, there was no salvaging what was left. I wasn't interested in her apologies, her tears, or her attempts to rewrite the narrative. As far as I was concerned, our marriage had ended the moment she stepped out with Dave. Everything after that was just paperwork. I didn't waste time. I hired the best lawyers money could buy, the kind of attorneys who didn't just win cases, but annihilated their opponents. These guys were sharks, and I knew I was in good hands. We sat down, went over every detail, and I made it clear what I wanted. I wanted Lisa out of my life for good, and I wanted to make sure she walked away with as little as possible. Fairness wasn't the goal here. Justice was. The first thing I did was block her on every channel: calls, texts, emails, everything. If she needed to communicate with me, she'd have to go through the lawyers. There was nothing left to say. The moment she left for that hotel, any lingering care or concern I had for her evaporated. We were done. Of course, the divorce process wasn't quick. It never is, especially when there's money involved. And we had a lot of it to fight over: the house, the assets, the business. Lisa thought she could play hardball, thought she was entitled to half of everything, like she could walk away from our marriage with a clean slate and a fat bank account. But she underestimated me. She underestimated just how far I was willing to go to make sure she only got what she deserved, and not a penny more. The court battles were ugly, meetings with lawyers, depositions, the whole 9 yards. Not once during the entire process did we speak. Every time we were in the same room, we avoided eye contact, as if we were strangers. I glanced at her occasionally, and she tried to put on a composed front. But I could see it. She was cracking, unraveling under the pressure. This wasn't the Lisa I'd married all those years ago. She was crumbling. Lisa, the woman who had always carried herself with such composure, was now desperately trying to hold on to whatever scraps she could. But she was slipping, and we both knew it. My lawyers were relentless. They tore her apart at every negotiation and every hearing. They left no stone unturned, finding every loophole in our prenup, every clause that worked in my favor, and every piece of financial evidence to back me up. And when the photos of her and Dave surfaced, that was the final nail in her coffin. The evidence was undeniable. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't spin it. She was caught, and the court saw it for what it was: her affair, her betrayal, and the collapse of our marriage squarely on her shoulders. The process dragged on for months. At times it felt endless. But I wasn't in a rush. Every day that passed, I could feel the end getting closer. And I could see it in her face, the defeat, the humiliation. She had gone from fighting me at every turn to barely showing up to the hearings. Deep down, I think she knew there was no escape this time. No way to twist the narrative in her favor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was over. The judge handed down the final ruling, and it was everything I had hoped for. I walked away with nearly everything: the house, the business, the bulk of our assets. Lisa? She was left with scraps, a small settlement that wouldn't last her more than a few months. She tried to argue for more, claimed she needed support, but the evidence was against her. The court sided with me on every major point. I'll never forget the look on her face when the ruling was read. It was a mix of disbelief, anger, and maybe regret. I couldn't be sure. But I didn't care. All I knew was that I had won. I had taken everything from her, just as she had tried to take everything from me. And now, she was left with nothing. As we walked out of the courtroom that last day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, and I haven't looked back since. But the truth is, even after all of that, there's no real satisfaction. Sure, I won. I took almost everything from her. She's out of my life for good. But there's no triumph in this, no victory. What's left is just the empty aftermath of a marriage that should have ended long before it did. I may have won the battle, but the war? That was hell. And no one comes out of that unscathed. It's strange, being on the other side of it all. Looking back at the lies, the betrayal, the chaos of the divorce, and realizing it's finally over. For so long, it felt like I'd never reached this point. Like the mess Lisa created would follow me forever. But here I am, still standing, still living, still moving forward. The first few months after the divorce were rough. I thought that once it was all settled, I'd feel relief. I thought winning would make me feel whole again. But the truth? Nothing prepares you for the aftermath. You don't just switch off years of history, emotional scars, and the weight of everything that's happened. There's no magic moment where things go back to normal. You have to rebuild. And rebuilding takes time. I had to relearn who I was outside of my marriage. For so long, my life had revolved around Lisa, around catching her, exposing her, getting back at her. When it was all over, I had to figure out who I was without that anger driving me. I threw myself into work. Expanded my business. Focused all my energy on building something bigger, better. And it paid off. The company is thriving, better than ever, and financially, I'm in a great place. Money doesn't solve everything, but it sure makes things easier when you're trying to piece your life back together. Therapy helped too, even though I fought the idea at first. I didn't want to sit in front of some stranger and pour out my feelings. But it worked. It helped me let go of some of the bitterness, some of the anger. That kind of weight will eat you alive if you carry it for too long. It was a slow process though, like chipping away at a wall, bit by bit, until you can finally see the other side. I started taking better care of myself, physically and mentally. I got back into working out, eating better, making time for hobbies I'd forgotten about. Things that had nothing to do with Lisa or our marriage. It helped me build a life that felt like mine again, something new, not just what was left over after the wreckage. But relationships? That's a different story. I'm not looking for anything now. I've learned that some things in life might not be for me. Love is one of them. I don't trust it anymore, not the way I used to. After everything I've been through, it's hard to imagine letting anyone get that close again, handing someone that kind of power over me. People always say you shouldn't let one bad experience define you, but this wasn't just one bad experience. This was my entire world, and it came crashing down. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being on my own. A lot of people think you need someone else to complete you, that a relationship is what gives life meaning. But I've learned that's nonsense. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, and purpose without anyone else by your side. I don't need a relationship to feel like my life is worth something. These days, my focus is on me, on my work, my health, and my future. I travel when I want to. I spend time with friends. I live a life free from drama and the constant weight of someone else's expectations or betrayals. It's simple, it's quiet, and it's exactly what I need right now. Will I ever change my mind? Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, I'm done with love, with relationships, and with risking my heart for someone else. I've learned that, sometimes, the only person you can truly count on is yourself, and that's enough for me. So yeah, I'm doing well. Better than I have in years. And if staying single and focused on myself is what it takes to keep this peace I've earned, then so be it. I'm not about to give it up for anyone. Not anymore.